I mean, that's up to you. Our class is usually recorded so you can catch it later, but I hope I don't abandon my entire class. Or you abandon me, let's put it that way. But I'm just letting you know. The other thing is Chris is supposed to try and get it done in 1 week, but he said that he may not get through all the material, which would take a second week, and I can't miss 2. That's all, I can't even miss 1 if I'm going to get through where I want to go with Isaiah. But anyway, I'm telling you that. Yes, that's what I understand.
So the guys who signed the Declaration of Independence said, better hang together or we'll all hang separate. They were doing that because the Lord wasn't going to watch over them or what?
Well,
I mean, I'm not anti-founding of America. I think it's just,
yeah.
sometimes you got to be careful there because
I think it was
you can get
maybe
too far off the edge.
more of the idea of how did Christianity play a part
In the founding, yes. Anyway, if you want more information, you can talk to Chris. No, that's okay. Let's continue to keep Rob and Sonia in our prayers. My understanding, I talked to them Friday, and I know that Sonia had some kidney stones, but those have passed. And they even got some encouraging news on Rob, and any sign of encouragement is positive. But he is supposed to come home tomorrow, is what I understand. But that doesn't mean he's through. It just, but at least they're being given some signs of encouragement. Teresa Trainer is still going through rehab, I believe, and Scarberry's, and those are the ones that come to my mind at the moment. But
Steve Johnson had broken hip.
Steve,
Already home.
okay.
Didn't have to do rehab or anything.
Okay, so Steve Johnson, who broke his hip, is already home, didn't have to do rehab. I don't know any update. Jim Hale's grandson, anybody know? Jim Hale's grandson? Not sure. We'll have to do some follow-up on that.
One of my brother, Tim, he has made the medical people aware that he desires to do nothing more than just medications to live on.
Okay.
More than likely he will be eating this.
So Melvin's brother Jim is taking a turn for the worse, and he's just kind of leaving fate in its hands, if you talk about that. Tim, would you lead us in prayer, please?
Father in heaven, thank you. Thank you for each day that you give us. Thank you that each week starts off with our having the privilege of being able to come together. Thank you for the encouragement that gives us. Father, thank you for the encouraging news on Steve Johnson that he was able to go home. Father, I pray for Melvin and his brother Jim, that there will be peace as they go through this period of time waiting to come home to you. Father, I pray for Jim and Nancy's grandson, that there could be emotional and mental healing there. Father, thank you for taking care of Sonia and Rob Weaver. Pray that they can be able to come home tomorrow, that we will continue to get encouraging news. Help us to be aware, Father, of all those that are around us in need of you, as we all are, but some need special care. Be with David as he presents the lesson this morning. Help us to be of an understanding heart and mind. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you. All right. Anybody remember what's going on with King Ahaz as we move into chapter 7 of Isaiah? We kind of covered it last week. What was going on? Okay, he was under threat of attack. Do you remember who it was? One should be obvious. Just look north. Assyria's one, and their brothers, Israel. And the idea is if we can conquer Judah and take it, then we'll have more land, plus we'll be stronger against the threat of Assyria. So Isaiah comes, he assures King Ahaz. By the way, what kind of a king was Ahaz religiously? He was evil. Sacrificing his kids, kind of evil, okay? Worship idols, kind of evil. But God's given him one more opportunity to show, I'm in control. You remember Isaiah gets called and he sees this vision of the Lord, and he's on the throne the year King Uzziah died. And remember the message. You all honor the king that's sitting there in Jerusalem, but you have failed to notice I'm still king. So he sees the throne of God. God's assuring him, I'm king. So Ahaz has an opportunity now to see the king in action. Ask for a sign, anything. And what's he say? I'm not going to bother the Lord. How do we know that was not a statement of faith? Remember, we went back and looked at 2 Kings. Where was his faith? King Ahaz. It was Assyria. Assyria. He's paying tribute to Assyria to come bail him out. Well, here's the thing, guys. If you're a nation that's small and you're paying another nation for your protection, how long do you pay until that protection runs out? Yeah, because if you're a king, what are you going to do? Well, if I can get money out of them, I'm going to milk it for all it's worth, right? So his statement, I'm not going to bother the Lord, was not a statement of faith. It was a statement of arrogance. It was a statement saying, I'm not going to put my confidence in God at all because I'm going to rely on Assyria to get me out of danger. The other thing is as Assyria is growing in power and cruelty, eventually that's going to come your way. They're only friends. If you have to pay your friends, they're only going to be friends for as long as you can pay them. You might call this the early version of the racketeer movements. You remember the racketeers that existed in the 30s, the gangs that would hound the businesses and saying, you need to pay me for protection or else? You remember that? Well, you got a racketeer business going on right here. And that explains Isaiah's reaction when Ahaz says, I'm not going to put the Lord to test. Look at verse 10. We'll reread this. The Lord spoke to Ahaz, ask a sign of the Lord your God. Let it be deep as the grave, Sheol, or as high as heaven. But Ahaz says, I'm not going to ask. I will not put the Lord to the test. And he said, hear then, O house of David, is it too little for you to weary men that you weary my God too? Therefore the Lord will give you a sign. Behold, the virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel. He shall eat curds and honey when he knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good. For before the boy knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, the land whose two kings you dread will be deserted. The Lord will bring upon you and upon your people and upon your father's house such days as have not come since the day that Ephraim departed from Judah, the king of Assyria. In that day the Lord will whistle for the fly that is at the end of the streams of Egypt, and for the bee that is in the land of Assyria. They will all come and settle in the steep ravines and in the clefts of the rocks, and on the thorn bushes and on all the pastures. In that day the Lord will shave with a razor that is hired beyond the river, with the king of Assyria, the head, the hair, and the feet, and it will sweep away the beard too. In that day a man will keep alive a young cow and 2 sheep, and because of the abundance of milk that they give, he will eat curds. For everyone who is left in the land will eat curds and honey. In that day, every place where there used to be 1,000 vines worth 1,000 shekels of silver will become briars and thorns. With bows and arrows, a man will come there, for all the land will be briars and thorns. And as for all the hills that used to be hoed with a hoe, you will not come there for fear of briars and thorns, but they will become a place where cattle are let loose and where sheep tread. All right. So, I'm going to give you a sign. You didn't ask for a sign. I'm going to give you a sign. What does that mean that God's going to provide a sign? What does that mean? We kind of ran into that when we were talking in Matthew, that Jesus was asked, show us a sign, even though they had already seen sign after sign after sign of things he did. What does that mean, a sign? If God's going to give a sign, what does that mean? A proclamation of things to come, and he's going to be the one providing that to happen. When they see a sign, they'll know it's from God. Do you remember Hezekiah was asked for a sign on his healing? And he said, you can choose between turning the shadow back or turning the shadow forward. And his thought was, I'm going to make it harder. It's harder to turn back than it is to go forward. So if God can do that, I'm going to know that what God says will come true. See, that's what a sign was for. It was confirmation of what God promised he would do. Now look at what the sign is. What's the sign? Well, you got to be careful with this. Because if this is only meant about Christ, it has nothing to do with Ahaz, and the sign is for him. Okay? Now, there are prophecies in your Bible that are very, very clear. It can only relate to Messiah, such as Micah's passage that the king will be born in Bethlehem. Who else would that apply to but Christ? But there are situations where, especially a sign for a king, it had to be done in his lifetime for him to understand the sign, but it doesn't mean that there wasn't another fulfillment later on. Does that make sense? So we need to understand what is being promised here and why. And this is where we get into the term virgin. The virgin shall conceive and bear a son and shall call his name Emmanuel. How do we know, looking at the rest of this passage, how do we know that not all of this could refer to Christ? How do we know? Look particularly at 16. What is this child, as he grows older, what is he going to know?
Before he knows to reject wrong and choose right,
Uh-huh.
two kings that'll be battling for their lands to be wasted.
Okay, so before the child knows how to refuse the evil and choose the good, did Jesus have to actually wrestle with that? Well, obviously he could be tempted, but not even the temptation of Satan would lead him into sin, because he knew the difference, didn't he? The other thing is, notice that it says, before this boy knows this, the two kings you dread. Who's you? Ahaz will be gone. So how could this only relate to Jesus? If he had to wait till Jesus to come, which is another 700 years, it would have no meaning to Ahaz at all. Understand? Okay, so, young maiden, before the child knows what's wrong, the two kings you dread will be gone. And who is labeled as the tool of God's judgment? Look at verse 17. It is Assyria. Interestingly, the one that Ahaz is paying for protection is going to be the tool God uses to wipe out the two nations that are oppressing him. But again, if you're an ungodly man and you're paying tribute and they come and rescue you, who are you going to give credit to for taking that oppression away? it's Assyria, not God. That's why the sign is so important. But if you see the sign and you ignore the sign, you're deliberately turning your back on God. That's why when Jesus said, give us a sign, I'm not going to give you any sign except the sign of Jonah, right? Because they had seen sign after sign and they chose to ignore those signs. They didn't recognize Jesus as the Son of Man or the Son of God. They didn't recognize him in deity at all. All they knew is he was some blasphemer claiming to be that, in spite of the fact that he was doing many of the signs before them. Now, the word virgin is used several times in our Bible. The Hebrew word is alma, and it literally means a maiden who has had no relations with a man. Couple times you'll find the same word alma in the Song of Solomon, referring to the young virgin who's about to marry King Solomon. Another person that the term is used for is Rebekah. Remember Rebekah, who they went after to give as wife to Isaac? She was a maiden, which means what? She was a virgin. So the idea here is not that she would be a perpetual virgin, right? Or that she would have no relationship with a man. The idea is that when there would be a relationship with her, she was a virgin, and then she would conceive and bring forth the child. And when all the events that God says is going to happen, the child's name is not going to be literally Emmanuel. It will mean, though, they will recognize God's presence was with us because God accomplished these things. Does that make sense? That's what the Emmanuel part means. Now, in the Greek, it's Parthenos, however you say that. And there, it actually is used 14 times in the New Testament. It's used by Paul in his instruction to an unmarried woman, a never married woman, like 1 Corinthians chapter 7, someone who's never been married, to virgins. It's used to describe the purity of the bride of Christ, that we are the pure bride of Christ. It's also to emphasize chastity of Mary, the mother of Jesus. Now, we know that Mary was not a perpetual virgin. We studied that in Matthew. How do we know that? Because she had brothers and sisters, and after she conceives, it says that Joseph had no marital relationships with her until when? Until Christ was born, okay? They were husband and wife in that way, in the sexual way. So we are to understand that Matthew helps us know that the text here means something much bigger than what Isaiah is promising. He's going to say, Mary is going to be a virgin in every way. In fact, when she becomes pregnant, it will not be because she had marital relationships with Joseph. She will be impregnated by the Spirit of God. In Isaiah's case, that's not how it's going to work. So take a look at chapter 8, and here you'll see how the fulfillment, the very first fulfillment, played out. Then the Lord said to me, take a large tablet and write on it in common characters. Here is the longest name in the Bible. If you want to stump your friends and impress them, learn this name. The longest name in the Bible. Belonging to Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz. And I will get reliable witnesses, Uriah the priest, Zechariah the son of Jeberechiah, to attest for me. So I went to the prophetess, and she conceived and bore a son. And then she said to me, call his name Maher-Shalal-Hash-Baz. For before the boy knows how to cry, my father or my mother, the wealth of Damascus and the spoil of Samaria will be carried away before the king of Assyria. The Lord spoke to me again, because this people has refused the waters of Shiloh that flow gently and rejoice over Rezin, the son of Remaliah. Therefore, behold, the Lord is bringing up against them the waters of the river, mighty and many, the king of Assyria and all his glory. And it will rise over all its channels and go over all its banks, and it will sweep on into Judah. It will overflow and pass on, reaching even to the neck, and its outspread wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. Be broken, you peoples, and be shattered. Give ear, all you far countries. Strap on your armor and be shattered. Strap on your armor and be shattered. Notice the emphasis twice. Take counsel together, but it will come to nothing. Speak a word, but it will not stand, for God is with us. Okay, so now we have the first fulfillment of what this prophecy would mean to King Ahaz. This is the fullness of the prophecy here. Now, last week, we spent a lot of time talking about what was going on in the nation of Israel. You remember the political uproar and the assassinations that were going on, the many different kings. Pekah is the second to last king that Judah will ever have before they're taken away. Okay? Pekah is the second to last guy. So, the message is a sign for King Ahaz. So what was Isaiah to write on that large tablet? Want to take a stab at it? Mer Shalal Hashbaz. What does that name mean? What does it mean? Quick to the spoil, hasty to the prey. Now, this is his second son. I had it up there for those who wanted to cheat. This is his second son. Do you remember when he went to talk to King Ahaz, he had a boy already whose name was, I got to look it up, where is it at? Shear-Jashub. That's verse 3. Shear-Jashub. And that name means a remnant shall return. So both of the boys' names actually have importance to the nation of Israel. But for this Mer Shalal Hashbaz name, what does that mean? What do you think God's naming this child this? What does it have meaning for Ahaz, for the kings of Syria, for the king of Israel? What does that mean?
He's going to be a successful warrior.
Who?
The second son.
No. Mer Shalal Hashbaz, his name would only represent what would happen. Okay, so when they would refer to his name, they would recall this event. But it wouldn't be him. Think about the context. Go back and look at verse 8. Verse 8 of chapter 7. Remember what God had promised he was going to do. This is Syria, Damascus, and Israel. What's he say? How long will it take before they're completely shattered? Within 65 years. And we know the very first place, because we looked at it last week in our 2 Kings text, the very first attack that Tiglath-Pileser made was against Syria, against Rezin, and Rezin was killed. He was killed in that battle. So the last part of this is actually now war with Pekah, the king of Israel. Pekah would be overcome, and in his place would be Hoshea. And Hoshea would actually be a loyal subject to Assyria for a period of time in his 11-year reign. But at some point in his reign, he's going to actually try and resist Assyria. Well, how do you think that worked? He was overtaken. In fact, it took about a 3-year period before they would be taken totally. But when they were taken, Israel stopped becoming a nation. So do you understand the swift to the spoil and quick to the prey? What God is saying is those two nations that Ahaz was fearing, they're defeat is coming very quickly, and there would be quickness to get the prey from those two nations. That's what Mer Shalal Hashbaz actually meant. So the idea here is, in what you're reading, the Lord would be seen as the one fighting the battle. Yes, Assyria is the tool, but God is the one that's in control. Think about it as a chessboard, okay? These kings are only moving because God is directing it to happen. Why in the world would he waste time with two nations that were insignificant like Syria and Israel? Is it because that Ahaz was paying him so much that just like, well, I guess they've earned this? No. These were cruel people. And God is behind the scenes. He would be the one that would strike the blow, the striking blow to Syria and Israel. And then when they went down, there would be quickness to the spoil and to the prey. And when they saw this, what would they know? Look at the very end of that section, verse 10. What would they know? That God is with us, and what name is given that says God is with us? That is Emmanuel. Now, when it was applied to Jesus, understand, that literally meant, nobody called Jesus Emmanuel. I mean, when they referred to him, they didn't call him that. They called him Jesus. Okay? But what was he representing? God is now with us. So God is with them here, not a physical way, but he is the one that's bringing about the destruction of these two nations, which is what the child's name implies in its meaning. So, the idea I want you to notice how it's described that the king of Assyria is kind of described as the flooding waters. The waters are going to come in and just wipe out those two nations. But did you notice, too, where else he will turn his attention to? Did you notice that? Where did I see that? Verse 8. Ooh. See, Judah is not going to escape Assyria. They're not going to escape because Assyria is going to come knocking on their door very soon. Now, here's the message for the people. Understand that Isaiah's primary message is to Judah, but there's a lot here going on that he's speaking to Israel too, the northern kingdom. And what his words are saying echoes that of both Amos and Hosea, who were also speaking at that same time to the nation of Israel. Now look at verse 11. For the Lord spoke thus to me with his strong hand upon me, and he warned me not to walk in the way of this people, saying, do not call conspiracy all that this people calls conspiracy. Do not fear what they fear, nor be in dread. But the Lord of hosts, him you shall honor as holy. Let him be your fear. Let him be your dread, as he will become a sanctuary and a stone of offense and a rock of stumbling to both houses of Israel, a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. And many shall stumble on it. They shall fall and be broken. They shall be snared and taken. Bind up this testimony. Seal the teaching among my disciples. I will wait for the Lord, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Behold, I and the children whom the Lord has given me are signs and portents in Israel, from the Lord of hosts, who dwells on Mount Zion. And when they say to you, inquire of the mediums and the necromancers who chirp and mutter, should not a people inquire of their God? Should they inquire of the dead on behalf of the living? To the teaching and to the testimony. If they will not speak according to this word, it is because they have no dawn. They will pass through the land greatly distressed and hungry, and when they are hungry, they will be enraged and will speak contemptuously against their king and against their God, and turn their faces upward, and they will look to the earth, but behold distress and darkness, gloom of anguish. They will be thrust into thick darkness. All right, so the main message here. What is his message? Look at verses 11 to 13. What's his main message? Okay, you are a different people because you are my people, right? So stop calling things conspiracy. Don't call those things what the people are calling conspiracy. In other words, when the nations are conspiring against us, stop calling that conspiracy and recognize it that God is actually the catalyst behind this. That's really what he's trying to get to, because the heart of all of this is in verse 13. What is the heart of all of this?
Let God be our fear.
Fear God, honor him as holy, let him be your fear. In other words, start treating God with the proper respect that he's deserved. Stop going after everything else, looking to everything else to be your God when God is to be the center. He's supposed to be the focal point of who you are. You're his people. In other words, if you are his people, start acting like it. Well, that's not a message today, is it? If you are God's people, show people you are. Stop resisting God. Stop resisting God's commands. Show people the love that God has shown to us. How would he, God, become a rock of offense and stumbling? How would he? Well, he does do that. Think of God as the most important part of the stone. We call it the cornerstone. And instead of it being the support of the people, what's it become? It's become a place where they fall and trip over it because they don't see the importance of it. They reject that stone. That sounds awful familiar to me. Where do we know that from? They did the same thing to Jesus, the cornerstone of the people and really of the church. So who is God's war literally against? Look at verses 19 to 22. Who is his war against? We might think it's against the people of Israel. We might think it's against the people of Judah. But who is his war really against? No. Okay, mediums and spiritists would be part of it. His war is against the entire idolatry industry. Everything. It would be everything that they're relying on in place of him. Let me tell you something, guys. Even us Christians can replace our God with other things that get our attention. And if we're doing that, we should expect God's going to have a war with those items to get our attention back. That's what God is in the business of doing. He doesn't want service to him to be intermingled with service to something else that holds our importance. I've heard it this way. Whatever we turn to in our hour of need and difficulty, that is who your God is. Whether it be drugs, alcohol, anger, food, anything that we turn for our substance of support and strength in our time of need, that is our God. And do we not sometimes go to everything else before sometimes we turn to God at the last, because we've run out of options? Don't we do that sometimes? So the idea here is that this is supposed to be a war against everything that they're turning to, including their idols, so that they would come back to God. Now, the aftermath that's found in all of this, really for Israel, and I've already covered this, in 722, Shalmaneser V went in and conquered Assyria, and that was where all that land was taken off into captivity. By the way, Assyria was not gentle in their taking people off to captivity. They were some of the most cruel people that you can imagine. In fact, if you've not read it in a long time, and it was part of our minor prophet study, read the book of Nahum. Nahum not only talks about how God is going to come against Assyria and destroy it, but in that book, he talks about the countless corpses that they have left in their efforts to take over the entire world. They used to say that when they would take people captive, they would literally hook in their lips one after the other and carry them off that way. They loved, in fact, the speaker last Wednesday, if you were here for Wednesday, talked about the kings that had the heads, that's trophies, and the flaying. That was Assyria. So now do you have some proper understanding why Jonah didn't want God to show grace to these people? Now they repented at the awful message that Jonah had, but it didn't last very long before they went right back and they actually broadened and heightened the amount of their cruelty to people. Isn't it interesting? When you read the Bible, you almost get this sense where God is struggling. He is struggling because I'm going to send this nation, but then he's like, now they're just being cruel for cruel's sake, and now God can't stand it anymore. They're hurting my people. Well, God, that's what you wanted in the first place, wasn't it? It was supposed to get their attention. But God still has a heart for his people, even when they're acting like knuckleheads and they're not really devoted to him.
David,
Yes, sir.
we see that in the New Testament.
Absolutely.
The northern tribes would become, in the New Testament days, the Samaritans.
Mm-hmm.
The Jews hated. And so because they were considered by them half-breeds. But
Yes.
when the gospel began to be preached, Philip was the first to go to the Samaritans.
Yes.
God still considered them to be Jews and his people
Yes.
in that regard. And so that's showing a lot of mercy and grace for the folks that
It is.
they deserve it.
And Isaiah is actually getting ready to prophesy of that, where and many of the prophets actually talked about how they would eventually become one nation again because of what Christ would accomplish. Let's take a look at chapter 9. We're not going to be able to probably get all through this. I got about 8 minutes. But this is an incredible passage. But there will be no gloom for her who was in anguish. In the former time he brought into contempt the land of Zebulun, the land of Naphtali, but in the latter time he's made glorious the way of the sea, the land beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the nations. The people who walked in darkness have seen a great light. Those who dwelt in a land of deep darkness, on them a light has shone. You have multiplied the nation, you have increased its joy. They rejoice before you as with joy at the harvest, as they are glad when they divide the spoil. For the yoke of his burden and the staff of his shoulder, the rod of his oppressor, you have broken as on the day of Midian. For every boot of the tramping warrior in battle tumult, and every garment rolled in blood will be burned as fuel for the fire. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be on his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace there will be no end, on the throne of David and over his kingdom, to establish it and to uphold it with justice and with righteousness from this time forth and forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will do this. All right, this is an incredible passage. Now, when we arrive here, supposedly we're still in the time of King Ahaz. But the question that we have to ask is, does this passage apply to Hezekiah? Hezekiah would be the next king who would come, and Hezekiah would be one of the most righteous people. And the truth is, there are some commentators that try to take this to mean, well, it couldn't initially be Hezekiah that he's talking about. The problem with that is what is stated here can't be applied to Hezekiah at all. It's not Hezekiah that's in mind here, because he would not fit under the criteria of everything that's listed here. Okay? The government was upon his shoulders only in the land of Judah, but he was not like free from problems, because Assyria was coming to attack them during his days. So I think this is one of those passages that's kind of like 2 Samuel 7. You remember 2 Samuel 7 is about David being promised that somebody will sit on his throne and be an eternal king? Well, some of what is said there might apply to Solomon, but there's no way all of it can. No way. And in this case, I don't think any of it applies to Hezekiah at all. Now, let's take a look here. Whom was the land of Zebulun and Naphtali? First of all, how were they in contempt? Let's go that way. Zebulun and Naphtali, how were they in contempt? It says in the former time, notice, he brought into contempt. Well, what was happening in Israel right now? What was happening? They were under Assyrian attack. And what did you say? Darkness and despair, because they're at war and they're ready to, the ship is sinking. So they were held in contempt. By the way, this is not Samaria. This is the land of Galilee up north. This is above, even north of where Ephraim and Manasseh were, which would be what we would call Samaria. But sometimes the whole nation in the north was called Samaria in the Old Testament. So it says that they were in contempt. Now in the latter days, what would happen? Light was going to shine on them. They would become a glorious nation again. It says the people who walked in darkness, they will see a light. Well, when did this happen? I'm wondering. Somebody turn over to Matthew 4. Do it quickly because we only got 3 minutes. Sorry. I'm going to try and get through this at least this section. 15 and 16. Okay, so the people in Naphtali and Zebulun, they were a people where? In darkness. Who brought them light? Well, where was the heart of Jesus' ministry found at? It wasn't in Jerusalem. It was in Galilee. This is what's talked about here. This is why when we're talking about Zebulun and Naphtali, Hezekiah never reigned there. The only thing that Josiah did was he went into those areas and he violated all the gravesides with the bones so that they couldn't use them for idolatry anymore. But he never reigned there. But Jesus lived his life there, and we get this wonderful, wonderful text about the child being born. And it talks about how he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. I don't have a lot of time, but when you think of Wonderful Counselor, what does that bring to your mind? Think of, yes, Jesus, but Jesus, I want beyond that. What does it mean? A wise person. What else? Think of what a counselor does. Sure, the help of the Holy Spirit, but what does a counselor do? Teaches you in the right direction. Truth and grace. A counselor listens to people, don't they? They hear people. He would hear people and extend grace to the people that would hear him. How about Mighty God? He's never called that in the New Testament. He's never called Mighty God. But what would that incur? What would that idea bring? Strength. Certainly strength, and there's numerous passages in the New Testament talk about the strength of Jesus, right? Physical strength. Power, absolutely power. Yes. The idea here is He is deity, and he has the same power that God does. He is the mighty God. Oh, how about everlasting Father? He never was the Father. He prayed to the Father. Well, what about that? Say it again. I am in God, and God is in me. You remember what Philip said? Just show us the Father, and that'll be enough. You taught that, didn't you? What did Jesus say? Philip, you've seen me. And if you've seen me, you've seen the Father. He is everlasting. He's from all time. He was in the beginning. No thing was made without him. He is creator. And how about Prince of Peace?
Not the peace that we talk about with the, it's not that peace, it's a reconciliation.
A reconciliation with God and breaking the hostility lines between people of all nations so they can now be harmonious as brothers and sisters, the body of Christ. These passages I'm not going to get to, but all of these talk about the idea of Jesus incorporating all of these aspects. And by the way, David's throne. He is on David's throne. Wanted to emphasize one last thing, but I'm going to wait till next week because we're not there yet. So I want you to think about, as we leave, you're going to read the expression the rod or the vine of Jesse. Okay? I want you to think about that. Why is it Jesse and not David? That's what we're going to answer next week. All right, we're done. Have a great week. We'll see you, hopefully, this week on Wednesday and then next week.
Here we go. Good, we're taking off for Colorado.
Sounds good. Sounds good.
Well, both my sons. He'll use it when he uses it.
Yes.
I'll still need it, so it takes a while.
Okay.
Ah,
It'd probably be better at the end.
it's a big job. I thought they were. They are, they literally are.
Hey, I never did sign a clipboard today.
Oh,